right about now I should be aiming a garden hose at my face because I pretty much have to pretend I'm driving the turbo boat because it's not in the water. I've never shoot it. I've never heard the 711 cubic inch twin turbo Sonny Leonard Hemi engine roar to life. This is it though. Final push. We're gonna make a series of videos about getting this thing on the water this summer so we can start having some fun on the water. So the jet boat has had a Bluetooth driveshaft and Bluetooth throttle for the longest time. In fact, ever since it went to SEMA. It went there looking really cool, but it actually wasn't a functional boat. We're going to make it functional. And the first thing I'm going to do now is hook up this cable that's going to go from our B1 Racing throttle assembly down here, which is a cool foot throttle. All right. All custom CNC pedal that fits my flip-flop because, you know, you drive a boat, you wear flip-flops. And it's going to connect to this Morse style cable. And right now we're mocking up our bracketry. So this is a standard marine cable clamp right here where the cable goes. We've got a couple of pieces of rubber and a zip tie holding it to our charge tube and attaching it to our Accufab throttle body. And right now we're just kind of mocking it up, checking out the action of it to see if this is where we want to craft our new mount. I'm going to have to make a pillow block that'll go between here and here. I'll TIG weld it to this aluminum charge tube. It'll bolt here. Several bolts, sets of bolt holes right here. This will give us adjustability. And right now, we're just figuring out, will this look cool and will it function? And it looks like we have our angle pretty good. Might slide this up a little bit so that this isn't rotating over center. But in general, if you can actuate it with your hand, it'll work with a gas pedal. Now, this has an angle because it's a 3.5 inch diameter tube. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this profile gauge to mark the contour of the tube. And then all I've got to do is trace that on the bracket that I'm going to make, and then I'll have a perfect contour to mimic the tube and weld together. Pretty sweet, huh? You get another look at that? See that? Goes right on there. Look at that! Went into my scrap pile, and I just happen to have an 1.25 inch thick piece of aluminum bar stock. All I gotta do now is clean it, mark the end of it right there, drill and tap some holes on it for this, and then this is way too heavy to install on any drag boat, so we'll go back in here with an end mill and we'll slot it and take some material out of it. Probably leave it 3/8 of an inch thick here so we have a surface to weld onto our tube, and about a 1/4 inch thick here, so there's enough meat for the screws to thread into it. We'll cut it off here. This here is machinist layout fluid. This is made by a company called Dykem, and it's a really slick product. You can brush it on or spray it on, but coats the part, and then you can scribe lines in that are much more defined than you would get using even one of these cool Milwaukee Sharpies. And the best thing about it is when you go to cut this stuff, most of your standard lubricants don't remove the Dykem off of it. Basically comes off with brake cleaner acetone, but if you spray a lube on here to protect whatever you're cutting with, it won't take the line out, unlike, you know, a Sharpie. So stuff is dope. Obviously our material doesn't need to be a foot long, so busting out the fine slugger, because this thing rules, especially for cutting aluminum. Look at that. A little burr on the bottom, but other than that, a nice straight square cut. Here's the start of our part. Covered in layout fluid. I've actually gone and scribed 2 lines that correspond with the bolt holes in our bracket, right? Put hash marks in there. Now it's time to punch this pattern, right? And I would have done this, you know, just with a click punch or a hammer and a punch, old school way. But since I'm not using a Sharpie to mark this part, I'm actually scribing stuff for a higher degree of accuracy, I'm going to mark it using this, an optical center punch. This one's made by Fowler. I'll put a link to the part in my description. I think I bought it off Amazon.com for 30 or 40 bucks. Awesome when you want to mark a hole and you need it to be exactly where you see it. Check this thing out. This tool is amazing. It's got a base made out of aluminum. It's got cork. You set it down on there. This right here is a magnifier. Find the center of your mark with the magnifier, then pull it out. Slide the punch in it, and boom, without moving anything, smack that with a hammer, and you will accurately mark exactly where you were looking. So the chuck in my central machinery, aka Harbor Freight drill press, won't go down small enough to hold the drill bit. I need to drill. And that hole needs to be 159 thousandths. That's the size hole you need to tap for a 10/32 screw. So, gonna use the mill, which will be really precise. I mean, let's be honest, it will be. So about to drill that. I need some light. So I want to show you guys this because this is really cool. This is a work light from Schumacher Electric. And lots of work lights out there, even ones with magnetic bases like this, but this one actually pivots. The magnetic base extends and pivots. One thing I really like about it is it will charge off USB, which is nice. It's cordless, it lasts a long time, it lights up both on the side and the top. It's very handy. I like to stick it to my mill table and use it to light up the work area. And then when I'm done working here, I take that same light and move it to other places in the shop. Here's how to drill and tap holes, especially tap holes, without breaking your tap when using machinery, like a cordless drill or a corded drill or your Bridgeport mill. Check this out. I've got a drill chuck. I've got my tap in there. The chuck is only hand tight. All right, I didn't use the chuck key and hammer down on this thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the machine on. I'm going to shut the machine off as I'm lowering the tap into the aluminum, and it will go so far and then it will stop and it will spin inside the chuck. It won't break the tap. And then I'll turn it on in reverse, back it back out, clean the chips, do it again, and within 2 shots we should be done without breaking. See it spin right there? Now we'll back it out. Clean the chips off. Throw a little lube on there. Gotta do that 5 more times. After a whole lot of drilling and tapping, we're halfway done with our part. See that? Look at that. Anti-roadkill. It fits and with precision. So now that that's on there, next goal is to make this fit right here and be much, much lighter. See? There's our angle. I'm gonna cut that in the bandsaw just because I can. I could hold it with my hands, but I don't want to. And yeah, so I'm gonna clamp it with these vice grip pliers, rough cut it, and then I'll go back and finish it on the disc sander. Bar soap works good on that for lube too. The aluminum gets really hot and it tends to clog up the blade. So there's our straight cut, there's the half moon we need. Now we need to go back and put a trench in this to match the outside circumference of the tube we got to weld it to. Red line right there. Remember what I talked before about how great this stuff is? Because you can coat it with lube and it doesn't take the Dykem off, so I can still see the line even though I'm lubing the end mill. I'm going to use the Bridgeport and the end mill to cut that half moon in there. I'll rough cut it and go back and sand it, but we'll get the bulk of the material off. And the reason I'm doing this is it's such a thick piece of aluminum that if you tried to half moon this with like a flap disc or something, you'd never get it level from top to bottom. It wouldn't be even. And you could lay a barrel sander across this, but I don't have one that's the right diameter to do this, so we'll do it this way. Here we go. It is roughed in. Moment of truth. There's the part where the bracket mounts. There's the part that I just rough cut in the mill. Look at that. Nailed it. This is gonna go right there. Part is finished. And it's lighter. It fits this bracket perfectly. Oh, giant throttle body. Look at the blade on that thing. I wonder how drivability is going to be. Good. And wide open throttle, who cares? All right, it's a good moment here. Charge tube's going back on, at least temporarily. We now have to strip this thing and repowder coat it because I was a bonehead. I built the charge tube and then afterwards went, oh, forgot to fit the blow-off valve. So there's the mount I made for the precision turbo blow-off valve. And then Dave's bolting that on, and on the other side you can see the cool mount that we made for the throttle cable. So there it is. Unfortunately, I'm more proud of the welds I did for the blow-off valve than I did the spacer for this bracket, but it is not going to fall off, which is the important part.
That's pretty difficult. I mean, this is like super thick. This is like super thin, so.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to welding aluminum on the Dynasty 280DX, and my settings are not optimal, definitely. What we've got here is a threaded rod end on the end of our cable, which converts it into something we can thread a bolt through. And we got a little spacer going in there. Let's see. Cable gets clamped into the mount right there. Notice where it's set up right now, there's a little bit of gap there and there. So we have adjustment for this to come back further. Doesn't need to right now, but there's adjustment here, so you don't want to bottom this out in the closed position. So we've got a little gap there, plus we have all the adjustment here of these holes. And then follow the cable down here, and we will attach it to our throttle pedal. This is what it'll be like. This is what it's like to sit in this. So you're directly in front of and can reach out and touch a, I don't know, 2,000 horsepower engine.
I can do this.
And that right there, that relationship between driver and engine is part of the reason why jet boats are badass. The other reason is normally you're not alone. There's a really attractive woman there in a bikini next to you. And that's why drag boats will always be cooler than drag cars. All right. So, come down here. We've got our mount in the side of the boat there. Yes, it is drilled all the way through. That is how it attaches. And the holes have resin and silicone on them so that hopefully they don't leak. So slide the collar back on the cable, put it on the ball end. Alright. And then swing it down, slide it over, and we will clamp it about halfway there.
And we're going to clamp center of this, right?
Yeah, I set it up for mid-travel. So center settable holes right there, clamp the cable down, and it's done. And now, as I go wide open here, we should have wide open here. Oh yeah.
You barely having to move your foot too. Like it's hardly any rotation down here.
Yeah, we got pretty good action here.
Pretty easy.
Oh, smooth like butter. And with no return spring on it other than what's built into the throttle body, it's coming back. This bar here actually goes into, like, I think they're oilite bronze bushings there. And you need this kind of pivot point here because it's a boat. It's made of fiberglass and wood, right? So there's no guaranteeing this mount is parallel with this floor here, right? These are the stringers of the boat. They're fiberglassed in. You'd like to think that that is parallel to this, but you don't know. So in a throttle like this where the bar spans the boat there, if everything was solid mounted, it would probably bind up. But because B1 puts these bushings in there that pivot, it doesn't matter if it's off just a little bit. One more piece of the puzzle. Done. So what exactly is game over? Well, to be precise, this is a Peterson Boat Specialties Placecraft hull. There have been several iterations of this. Tom Peterson created this one to go really, really fast. The hull is made of fiberglass, and it's very thin and very lightweight. The entire hull weighs 420 pounds. These are all aluminum mounts for the seats, for the engine, for the jet drive, all of this stuff. It's all made of aluminum to save weight. It is propelled by a Dominator jet drive that B1 Racing built. What is a jet drive? Well, it's basically a water pump. And it's unique in that that intake is essentially a hole in the bottom of the boat. And water is going to come up through this hole and then be squeezed out the back of the boat. The jet drive is right here. It is directly driven by the engine. There's no transmission in between here, no gears, none of that. So whatever RPM the Sonny Leonard engine is turning, the jet pump is turning. Inside here is an impeller. It's like a propeller, like a regular boat, except it's shrouded, right? So the impeller in here is actually sucking the water through the jet pump out the bottom of the boat, right? And how powerful is the suction? Well, this boat, and like most jet boats, it's known to be very safe to run in shallow water rivers and whatnot. On the trailer right now, the boat's sitting probably about 3 feet off the ground. If the engine was running in water, it would suck whatever rocks were on the floor of the shop up into the jet pump and destroy itself. And what's interesting about these boats is all the water is funneled out here. This is called a place diverter. It's an adjustable nozzle, goes up and down, and that helps trim the boat out at different attitudes. All the water comes out of here, right? But the water doesn't have to hit anything for the boat to move. If you took this and you pointed this nozzle straight up in the air, the water's just going into the air. It's not hitting anything, right? The boat would still move across the water. it wouldn't be safe, but it would move. So what's happening here is the action of the water being displaced from here in the intake to here is what's making the boat move. The boat is actually pulling itself through the water. It's pretty cool. All right. So what else propels the boat?
The drive shaft?
Oh yeah, we finally have a drive shaft. No more Bluetooth. We have an aluminum drive shaft, which will be more than strong enough for this setup. The unique thing about this is boats don't have traction, right? You don't have a lot of the harsh shock loads through the drivetrain that you get on a car that is friction driven across a surface. You know, there is no dry hop. There is no dead hooking at the starting line. These things basically do a burnout, eventually gain traction, and go. So the engine is a 711 cubic inch, all aluminum, Sonny Leonard racing engine. Basically a Chevy Hemi. The block is a 5-inch bore space block that is loosely based on big block Chevy design. And because of that, a bell housing for a transmission that would go behind a 454 will bolt onto the back of this thing. The motor mounts are basically the same. Water pump area, basically the same. Timing set, basically the same, you know, except the bores are spread apart in this thing. Instead of it being 4.84 inches, this is 5.00 inches, which allows you to have giant bores. This has a 5120 stroke. This has a 4700 bore. It's a cast aluminum block by Brodix. It is cast aluminum heads that are Sonny Leonard's design. That's a Sonny Leonard intake, which is made out of multiple pieces of billet aluminum. It has Harley Dominator EFI. The intake elbow up there is a custom deal that my friend Aaron Sellers created. That is an Accufab throttle body. That is a precision turbo air-to-water intercooler that Newburn and I made some custom mounts for, welded them to the intercooler, and bolted them into the boat. It has precision turbo, 85, 86 millimeter turbos. They're really not that big. What I told those guys was, I don't need 3,000 horsepower. I need it to spool now. Because in a boat like this, a jet boat, there are no brakes. You can't put it on a trans brake. You can't sit there and spool it. It's moving. It has reverse. And the way reverse works is the water coming out here, this closes and redirects the water to come out of here. And the water going backwards makes the hole move backwards in the water. And it works okay. But essentially, if you're drag racing one of these, there's no way to stall it. There's no way to put it on a foot brake. You're just holding onto a rope stretched across the water, and you need a way for it to spool and go quickly. So tiny turbos for a massive engine.
So what does this engine weigh?
We weighed this a while ago. What did it weigh? I think this whole engine without the turbos weighs like 600 pounds, 570, 600 pounds. It's really not very heavy. The whole boat, when it's done, rigged, ready to race, is probably going to be about 1,500 pounds, which is ridiculous. So you can imagine why the power to weight, the acceleration is so much fun to experience. It's the primary reason I love jet boats is when they leave the starting line, they leave frigging hard. You know, it wants to rip your arms out of their sockets when it works correctly.
How big are these exhaust primaries here?
So the exhaust system, custom built here in the garage, out of a kit from stainlessheaders.com. They are, God, what were these? 2 3/8 primaries, I think. I think they were 2 3/8 primaries. I don't even remember anymore. Going into a collector with a 2.5-inch outlet into a T4 flange. And for those guys that keep asking, why didn't I use Nelson's mirror image turbos? The honest truth is I have friends at Precision Turbo and they hooked me up with these turbos. Nelson stuff is amazing. I love it. And it would make, you know, a very sanitary installation, making everything mirror image and symmetrical. But I think we did a pretty good job of putting these in here where, you know, it's fairly centered. And I really dig the charge tube running down the center of the intake into the intercooler. That's probably my favorite aspect of this setup is it's one of the cleaner turbo setups out of there. So, yeah, that is game over in a nutshell, and we're going to continue working on it here in Finnegan's garage until it hits the water this summer. So thanks for watching, and see you later.